Hey BookTube, it's David from Live Forever or Die Trying, and keeping up with the momentum from Sunday's video, we're going to be doing another top 5. Last time we touched on the top 5 books I read in 2019, and this time we're going to be talking about the best books I've read in 2020 so far. Again, all nonfiction, and I still am a relatively beginner reader, so all these books are going to be accessible to newcomers to the genre. We touched on a little bit different themes this time than in the last video, but we'll circle back to that and round out those thoughts at the end of this one. So, to get this top 5 started, we're going to be looking at 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. So this is kind of like the third book of his nonfiction trilogy, if you would. So we had Sapiens, where we looked at like shared myths and an anthropological look at the history of humankind. Then we had Homo Deus, which wasn't in the top 5, but I did read last year, which talks about kind of far future and problems with AI and like shared neural nets and really far out there stuff. Fun read, but not my top 5. And then we get to 21 Lessons. So 21 Lessons is kind of looking at our near future. And it's written as if it's 21 loose essays that each address a big ethical question that we have looming on a horizon. So we touch on everything from like how is biotech and infotech, big data, artificial intelligence, how is that going to affect our life in the near future? Is it going to create a useless class of people where automation has literally made menial jobs useless and we have more people than we have jobs could even be created? How does religion play into the future? How do we tackle the problems of nationalism and terrorism? What is nationalism good for? It talks about the pros and cons. And what I really like about this book is it's kind of equal parts optimism as it is doom and gloom. And it's speculative. One of the things I hate is when books propose these big questions that we need to answer, but the author refrains from giving any of their own opinions. This is kind of like the exact opposite. So Harari has no qualms about saying he doesn't know the answer, which obviously we can all respect, but he doesn't shy away from trying to tackle them. He kind of explores the beginning of answers, and that's what I love about this book. So even if certain topics don't directly engage with you, like politics or inter-country relations or economics, the way it is written about with the insight, the humor, as well as the analogies in this book really make it an engaging read through and through. When I looked at the back cover, I actually wasn't going to pick this book up originally after reading Sapiens and Homo Deus. Both of those books I immediately knew I kind of wanted to read, but this one I shied away from. That wasn't until I got it for free through my library on audiobook, played it in the car, and killed it in like 2 days. So this book, I think you should try to find some reviews online, see if it's up your alley, and see if you get hooked like I do. I truly think it's an amazing read. The second book we're going to be talking about is going to be Lifespan by David Sinclair. Sinclair is I believe, professor of genetics at Harvard. If I get that wrong, I'm going to be embarrassed. But this kind of plays into the theme of my channel, which is like lifespan, longevity, and what have you, living a better life. So Lifespan, in the first 70 pages, what I really like about this book is David proposes his information theory of aging. And it sounds like an academic work, but David is really a accessible scientist. He's writing for the general population. He wants people to get excited about this, invest in the technology and really push life extension and longevity forward. Now that being said, that sounds pretty dry if you're not already interested in like life sciences or longevity. Now, I will say this book is more entertaining than a lot of those kind of sciencey books. It's not written like a memoir, it's not telling a story, but it is engaging. What I mean by that is this book comes in at a little over, I think, 300 pages. Yeah, 400 with notes. But David spends the first 70 pages, and only the first 70, laying out the information theory of aging. And a super quick synopsis I've talked about in other videos, but it's like the epigenome that reads the DNA is kind of like a old school laser disc, and if you polish the disc, you can get rid of some of the damage. We know that genes can reset and reproduce because if two 30-year-old parents have a kid, the cells that the kid is made out of doesn't come out as 30. So we already know the body can rewrite itself and reverse aging. We just haven't figured out how to manipulate that yet. But he explains that out and fleshes that out in this book with the information theory of aging. But that's 70 pages. We still have another 230. And that's where this book kind of gets really interesting. The second third is talking about unique sciences that David's working on in his lab right now. Specifically, one experiment that I thought was really, really intriguing is you have these 4 genes called Yamanaka factors. I believe a scientist, last name Yamanaka from Japan, won a Nobel for it in 2016. But basically, you can take any cells, skin cells, whatever, flip on these 4 genes and reverse it to a stem cell. And with that stem cell, you can add proteins to a mix to trigger it and make it become whatever you want. So specifically, David's talking about a experiment they did with rats, where they had rats with a severed, forget the name of it, but they basically had a crushed nerve or something that attached the eye to the brain. They reverted these cells to Yamanaka, like stem cells, injected them, and they regrew the very intricate neural wiring to communicate between the eye and the brain. So for me, just reading about that felt groundbreaking. Again, it's a little sciencey, so this might not be up everyone's alley, but it's a really engaging and accessible read for what it is. All right, for book 3, we have Why Buddhism is True. Now, this book, again, I feel like it had bad branding, and he addresses this early in the book. When I see a book like on the shelf at Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or wherever, and I see Why Buddhism is True, I see that just like another kind of, I don't want to say shilly, but somebody is trying to convert you and be evangelical to whatever religion they're selling. But that would turn me away anytime. However, for free on audiobook through my library, I came across it, saw it had decent reviews with a number of reviewers, and I gave it a shot. So it turns out this isn't a shilly selling you on religion book. It's actually written from a scientific approach. Specifically, I believe the author Robert Wright is looking at the modular theory of mind and basically how different parts of the brain can come up with different solutions and how that relates to meditation. So when he talks about why Buddhism is true, he's not talking about how you can actually reach enlightenment and how that ties into with reincarnation or what have you. I'm not well versed on Buddhism, so forgive me if I'm butchering something here. But he's not talking about the religious aspects. But what he does do, kind of on the border of religion, which is he looks at the Buddha's old teachings and what was written about him or attributed to him, and shows how a lot of the teachings actually line up with modern neuroscience and psychology. And it's really fascinating the parallels that are drawn between ancient Buddhism and current modular theory of mind. On top of that, Robert in this book, and I really hope that's the author's name because I'm not looking at it on my screen at the moment, but Robert writes with a sense of humor. He has various experiences in his silent retreats where he's talking about just inane things that are happening in his head, or how somebody has gas in the meditation hall and trying to get past that. And it's infusing the science with a memoir-esque quality. So similar to the books in 2019, this has a little bit of an overarching narrative and a story that keeps you engaged. But it's not quite like those. It's more about the comparison between modular theory of mind meditation in Buddhism. Book number 4 is going to be in a similar vein to Lifespan, and that's going to be Hacking Darwin by Jamie Metzl. Now, this book you've heard me talk about in, I believe, my nonfiction on BookTube tag for my favorite book of 2020, and this is the favorite book of 2020. So, the reason I really, really love this book, and this goes back to the 21 lessons, where I was talking about speculative, like nonfiction. Hacking Darwin is broken down into a few different parts. Basically, the first part is setting you up with a super crash course on, super fast crash course on genetics. You know, these are the things you need to know to understand the rest of the book. Basically aimed at the layperson who has never read an ounce of genetics information in their life. So he lays that out in the first few pages of the book, maybe takes 3 or 4 chapters. Then he's jumping into kind of where genetic engineering is playing a role in current 2020 science. And then at the tail end of the book, he starts speculating on the future. So where we currently are with genetic engineering is pretty wild already. The things we're doing, you know, growing different organs on different creatures, fixing genetic disorders and diseases, or just wild stuff. But where this book really shines for me is the tail end. The last third of the book basically talks about either the potential utopia or the potential dystopia we could have in the future, depending on who gets this technology first and how we end up harnessing it. So let's talk about something on a brighter note. You might have heard me mention this before. You take those people from earlier when I was talking about Lifespan with the Yamanaka factors. You have 2 gay adults who want to have a baby. You take skin cells from one, you take skin cells to the other. You use the Yamanaka factors, create stem cells, turn one into sperm, one into egg, and then either do a surrogate mother or, you know, maybe in the future we can have a baby outside the human body. But you can now have a child from 2 men that would normally not be able to, and it could share their genetic information. So that's groundbreaking. We are already doing tests and trying to create animal embryos where we can do this, and it's not terribly far off. However, we contrast these potential advances with like potential nightmare scenarios, right? So if an authoritarian regime or a dictator wanted to say take infants or take babies and turn off certain things in their head that would like trigger fear, or, you know, maybe it would enhance muscle strength, you can create super soldiers. That can get scary, but he uses about 10 or 15 different examples of how this technology can be harnessed. And really, I think this book is a appeal to democratization. Basically, he wants you in on this conversation. He wants the public realm to have a vote on how these ethics are used, and to not only leave it up to the scientist. And then finally, for book number 5 of the year, or top 5 so far, we have The Secret of Our Success by Joseph Henrich by Joseph. So this book is subtitled How Culture is Driving Human Evolution, Domesticating Our Species and Making Us Smarter. And it's a broad stroke anthropological look at how culture transcends genetics, drives genetics, and is a somewhat self-encompassing, is that the right word? Or self-driving. He calls it autocatalytic process. Basically, it's something that once created fuels itself going forward. So what I found is really interesting in this book is how culture transcends individual humans. How humans can sit down and try to think of how to solve a problem, but a lot of the times it isn't as smart as something that could arise strictly from culture. So a good example of this was, I believe, a South American tribe that was eating corn. Now, corn, the way they were eating it was not releasing, I believe it was either a B vitamin or niacin, or they could be synonymous, but they would have these nutritional deficits that over 20 to 40 years would add up and cause these terrible, debilitating diseases. Of course, over 40 years, you're not being able to figure out, A causes B causes C. However, these tribes have figured out that if you mix this food with, I believe it was ash or a specific type of ash from a fire, then it releases or makes bioavailable the nutrients in the food. And that's not something that anybody could have figured out necessarily. It's most likely a result of trial and error, but it led to results that the people practicing the ritual did not understand, yet benefited them. Another really interesting example was either a Alaskan Indian Native American tribe, or it was, I think that was it. But they were caribou hunters. Now, caribou, when hunted and have one of their pack or herd die, they don't go back to that area. However, it's a natural human tendency that when you're hunting and you have success in an area, you go back to that area. So if they didn't have some way to get around this or didn't inherently know it, they would have been less successful hunters. But what they did in order to honor the animal is they would take, I believe, the pelvis bone from the caribou. They would roast the pelvis bone over the fire until it had cracks going through it, and then they would read the cracks in the pelvis bone in order to create a map from their gods about where to hunt next. So, religion aside, what this effectively did was randomize their hunting location and strictly give them a better chance of success. This religion created a ritual in which they probably didn't intend to, but made them better hunters. And this book is absolutely packed with examples similar to that. It really is kind of an eye-opening book. And it reminds me of Sapiens by Harari as well, in which it takes a wide brushstroke in order to cover a lot of ground. So it's not terribly in-depth on a lot of these, but if you want to look into, say, the caribou hunters of Alaska, it's really well sourced, so you can go have further reading on those subjects. So that's my top 5 books of 2020. If you noticed, in my 2019 video, they all were memoir-esque or had some narrative storytelling aspect to them. What I noticed so far in 2020 is each of these books, and I don't know the exact word for it, but was exploratory. A lot of them were bigger picture. 21 Lessons is a collection of 21 essays. The Secret of Our Success is taking examples from 50 tribes from around the world and comparing culture. Hacking Darwin, speculating about the future. Same with Lifespan. And I guess the only one that doesn't strictly fit that is Why Buddhism is True. But even that book is comparing fresh science to Buddhism and ancient teaching. All these books had a wide breadth that they covered, but were all kind of feeling their way along new discoveries or proposing novel ideas. So that's interesting. This wasn't chosen on purpose. It's just something that I noticed after I put together this selection of my top 5 books and checked through my Goodreads to select these in the first place. But it's going to be interesting to see the tail end of 2020 and if this pattern increases or strengthens, or if the last 4 months of 2020 lead me down a different reading path. Like if I find more of those memoir-esque books, or if I get into biographies or something similar, or if those philosophy books sitting over there really capture my attention. It's going to be interesting to see if the first half of 2020 has an entirely different flavor than the second half. But that pretty much wraps it up for today. I hope you found some books to add to your TBR. I really stand by all these recommendations and personally found them really enjoyable. As always, subscribing, liking, and commenting helps out the channel, pushes me along the algorithm, and the social pressure leads me to make more. If you have any questions or would like to see any videos, drop those below as well. As you know, I started uploading every other day for at least 2 weeks as part of a 1,000 subscriber special. So this is Monday the 24th. I'm recording this now for release on Tuesday the 25th. And we're already almost at 1,100 subs. So just in this past 2 weeks, the channel's kind of taken off again and picked up more steam. So this is really cool. I don't know what more to say about it than that. I never really expected to have an audience of this size, and it's kind of scary in a way. Like, I have a little bit of stage fright, and I couldn't imagine myself speaking to 1,000 of you in the same room. But I really appreciate the support, and I love having y'all in the comments to interact with, help me on my book recommendations, as well as just broadening my perspective. But yeah, until next time, see ya.